Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 44, and today we are covering the final book in the Young Jack Sparrow series, Bold New Horizons. Now, before you start saying, but it isn't really the last book, I know, but the next book is not a sequel to this, as it is a spin-off about the origins of Bootstrap Bill Turner and how he met Arabella and the crew of the Fleur de l'Amour. So technically, this is the last book in the series, finally ending the 12-book arc about Jack Sparrow's first year at sea. Now, if you don't remember what happened last time, Jack met Bootstrap Bill for the first time, and he also met back up with his old crew. Arabella, John, Tumen, and Constance are all back, along with Arabella's mother Laura and her first mate, Mr. Reece. The only person missing here is Fitzwilliam, but of course, as I said last time, he will not be coming back. Once Jack met up with his crew again, they encountered the 3 blue-tailed mermaids that Jack met back in Book 2 and 4, Morverin, Aquila, and Aquala. They told him that a war was coming, and then we also saw that Captain Torrents has returned one last time, and now he has Poseidon's Trident, and with it, the power to control the merfolk. And on the last episode, I also explained the difference between the book version of Poseidon's Trident and the movie version called the Trident of Poseidon. It's up to you if you want to think they are the same trident or not, but that is where the last book left off. So it's time for Jack Sparrow to face his biggest challenge yet. So let's get right into it. Without further ado, let's dive right into the final book in the Young Jack Sparrow series, Bold New Horizons. So remember back in the first 3 books, they began and ended with captain's log entries written by Jack Sparrow. The last one was at the beginning of Book 3, The Pirate Chase, and since then they kind of just disappeared in the rest of the books. But since this is the last book, it does actually start with a captain's log entry. And it is a pretty long one since it practically covers everything that's happened over the course of the whole series. I'm not going to read this one in full since it is pretty long and it just recaps the rest of the books. But we're going to go right back into the actual book, which starts right after the captain's log entry. So here we go. So the book starts right where the last book left off, and that is everyone still in the underwater cavern, and Captain Torrents is standing with Poseidon's Trident in his hand. While everyone is cowering from Torrents, Laura Smith sets her jaw and walks forward. So let's see what happens here. So in the book, Captain Torrents says, "Do you have something to say for yourself then, Smith?" Torrents demanded. "That's Captain Smith, you shipless mutt," she shot back. "I should have killed you properly back in Tortuga." "Oh, you were quite the captain back then," Torrents said, rolling his eyes. "Speaking of shipless." "Wait, these two know each other?" John asked, confused. "Pirating's a pretty small circle these days," Jack said airily as if he knew. Which, in fact, he sort of did. It was his family's trade, after all. "Ah, and what were you?" Captain Smith asked Torrents. She rolled her eyes and turned to face the crew. "You lot should have seen him, before he was cursed by Davy Jones, before he had the power of the seas and waters, before he had the trident. Just another scrawny sea dog. I think he and his crew were captured more times than he actually set sail." "Smith," Torrents growled warningly. "Oh, I'm not making it up, am I?" She whirled on him. "Your biggest haul was a boatload of bananas on its way from Jamaica." "Mum," Arabella said pleadingly, worried by the look on Torrents' face. "And do you know what the name of his mighty ship was?" Captain Smith leaned forward as if imparting a great secret. "It were a fine ship," Torrents said, a little sadly. "The Monkey Butt," Captain Smith announced with great smugness. Jack smirked. John and Tumen could barely contain themselves. Even the usually stoic Billy Turner smiled. The Mermaid Queen Morverin just raised an eyebrow. Torrents slammed his trident down on the ground, causing the cavern to quake. "Silence! Perhaps it was that I was so easily taken by the Navy because a certain someone tipped them off to where my next attack might be," Torrents continued, pointing his finger accusingly at Arabella's mother. Everyone looked at Captain Smith in shock. She tried to affect a look of surprised nonchalance. It didn't work. Finally, she gave up and let go an exasperated sigh. "I'm a pirate. That's what we do. What do you want from me? Oh, aye, Torrents growled. And as it says in the pirate code under the subsection Revenge, I followed you to Tortuga to murder your sorry betraying hide. It's only betrayal if I claim to be loyal to you, Captain Smith pointed out reasonably. I never liked you. Excuse me, mate, Jack said, putting up a hand like a schoolboy. Something had occurred to him. Did you say Tortuga? When, approximately was that? Just so you know, for accuracy's sake. It was a big full moon, round and shiny as a gold doubloon, Torrents said, surprisingly poetic. Last fall. Jack did a quick mental calculation. Last fall he had been a stowaway, a wet and cold one, who entered a certain bar on Tortuga and met a certain barkeep who became his first mate, the same night that he accidentally stole a certain sack from a certain pirate, thinking it was his own. Oh yes. Revenge, right. I remember now, Captain Smith said, laughing. You couldn't even do that right. You were all revenge this and get her at sword point that, and then some little brat goes and steals your luggage, and suddenly revenge is the last thing on your mind. Hey, Jack said, offended, as he was the brat Laura was speaking about. Wait, Arabella piped up. You were on Tortuga? Why didn't you come to see me? I thought you were dead. Hold on just a moment, Jack said, interrupting. If this conversation goes off its tracks, it should be me who derails it. Let me get this straight. If you, Captain Laura Smith, hadn't repeatedly turned you, Captain Tornpants, over to the Royal Navy, you, Captain Tornpants, wouldn't have sworn revenge on her, Laura Smith, which means you wouldn't have come to Tortuga, which means you wouldn't have followed, which means I wouldn't have accidentally stolen your... Jack waved his hand looking for the right word. Luggage. Torrents and Captain Smith both looked at him, shrugging and nodding. Aye, so? Torrents asked. So, Jack cried, all this folderol I've been through the last year, cursed swords, being chased by the Navy, going backward and forward in time with that stupid watch, dealing with the blasted scaly tails, all of that could have been avoided had you, he pointed at Captain Smith, simply not ticked off Captain Torrents here, sending him to Tortuga after you, setting in motion all the aforesaid adventures? Everyone, Arabella, Billy, John, Tumen, the three merfolk, and even Constance looked at Jack in confusion. Oh, never mind, Jack sighed, giving up. He waved at Torrents and Smith. As you were. Carry on with your little back and forth. He stepped back with a bow. Well, as long as you're talking about revenge and the code, Captain Smith said, taking up their fight again, you must know that there is a very specific passage in the code that mentions the Trident. No pirate shall have his own possession of the mythic weapon. It's too powerful and too dangerous. Well, who needs the code anymore when you have a weapon this powerful? Torrents asked. You see? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Captain Smith said in exasperation. Only further evidence of you not being worthy enough of the title pirate. Captured by the Navy, ignoring the code. Worthy? Tumen asked with mild amusement. Pirate is a title? It is very important to them, like secret handshakes in the Brotherhood, John said, shrugging. It's a way of life, dear boys, Captain Smith interjected, placing a hand on Tumen's shoulder. One that our friend Torrents here could not keep up with. Torrents roared with anger and struck the ground with the trident. The entire cavern shook again. Pulverized rock began to crumble, and more fissures appeared in the walls, growing like scary black vines. And then the water began to rush in. Jack's eyes widened as a hole opened up near him. He quickly stuck his hand in to seal it. And then another hole opened. Jack stuck his other hand in. And then another. And another. He was trying to figure out how to stuff his boot in when he finally gave up. The walls were cracking open, and the sea was pouring in everywhere. You and your crew, Torrents began. Crews, he said, correcting himself, looking at Jack, have interfered with me for the last time. John said nervously, my friend and I here are part of no one's crew. We are retired. And you'd best not have him implying, Torrents, that I am aligned with any crew but my own, Captain Smith interjected. Excuse me yet again, Jack said, taking his right hand out of the hole in the cavern wall to hold it up like a schoolboy yet again. A stream of water shot over his shoulder. In case you hadn't noticed, there's a flood of water pouring in, and as there's no place really for us to run, there's a surprisingly good likelihood we're all going to drown, whoever is crew and who is not. The cavern shuddered again as seawater weakened the walls. Another portion of the ceiling gave way. Constance meowed. Billy pulled Arabella tightly to him. Captain Smith looked mildly concerned. Tumen and Mr. Reece began banging the walls with the pommels of their weapons, trying to find secret escape routes that didn't involve holding their breath underwater forever. Admittedly, I could, with just one more blow, cause the entire cavern to collapse down on ye, Torrents said thoughtfully, but I've decided to bless you with a little extra time. Time in which you can do nothing but watch the water grow higher and higher until you drown." He slammed the trident against a wall. Sparks flew. Coursing through one of the larger holes in the wall came two magnificent blue horses, the ones Jack and Billy had recently freed from being buried on the island. They were Poseidon's horses, and they pulled the god's ornately carved coral chariot. They danced lightly in place, treading the top of the rising water with pearly hooves. "Farewell, ye doomed," Torrents called as he leaped up into the chariot and grabbed the reins. He flicked them viciously, and the horses took off down one of the tunnels, churning the water into foam as they went. The crew watched them go. The merfolk appeared unaffected by these most recent events. After all, they could breathe underwater. "I'd say we have about a quarter hour before the water reaches the ceiling," Mr. Reece said, raising an eyebrow and gauging the speed of the water, which was now up to the crew's knees. "Thank you," Jack said through gritted teeth. "That helps ever so much." So Torrents has now left the crew in the cavern, and water is rushing in from all around. Mr. Reece assumes that they only have 15 minutes or so until the cavern completely fills up, so they have to figure out something fast. Everyone begins to argue with each other, but Jack decides to ask the mermaids if they know a way out. They tell him that they don't know of a passageway out of the cavern that is suitable for land dwellers. Everyone then continues to argue, with Mr. Reece saying they only have now 10 minutes. Then they try to begin plugging the cracks in the cave walls, hoping that will stop the water from rushing in, and it does work for one of the cracks, but at this point there are dozens of cracks all over the cavern, and I love how Jack says, "Splendid! Just 40 more to go!" So now this plan hasn't worked, Jack asks the mermaids again for help, since they are running out of options and time. So let's go back into the book and see what happens next. So Jack says, "Now ladies, I wouldn't normally stoop to a level so despicable as to request assistance of you all scaly-tails, but I fear I have no other recourse," he said. "How dare you?" Morverin began, directing an angry look at Jack. "How dare who what?" Jack asked in confusion. "How dare you ask our assistance after not even attempting to assist us in our war with the terrible Torrents?" Aquila explained, equally angry. "Are you serious?" Jack asked. Then he turned to Arabella. "Are they serious?" Arabella shook her head, equally confused. "We're about to drown here," Jack shouted. "Can we discuss this later?" "Of all the vile, slippery, piratical ways in which you have escaped your responsibilities, drowning is perhaps the most deplorable," Aquila continued, "especially considering the countless inappropriate ways you have cheated death and slinked away with your mangy hide intact. And you can't even be bothered to find your way out of this chamber," Morverin picked up coldly. "So you and your crew can follow Torrents, stop him, and retrieve the Trident, so we merfolk can once again be free." "Oh, scaly tails!" Jack shouted, getting angry. "I don't give an albatross's foot about your blasted freedom, and even if I did, which, as previously stated, I do not, on my list of things to do, save scaly tails would fall far, far below remember to brush teeth. And I think we all know how infrequently I do that," Jack mumbled the last part. "And," he added, just as Morven was opening her mouth for a nasty comeback, "we wouldn't even be down in this dark, wet death trap if you hadn't kidnapped me here." He gave Billy Turner a nasty look. The poor reluctant pirate had been forced to go find Jack after the merfolk had captured the rest of the Flora's crew. "I am truly sorry, Jack," Billy said mournfully. "It truly is my fault. You're right. You're going to drown because of me." Jack sighed and rolled his eyes. "Pirates don't apologize, mate. Captain Smith, what type of pirate ship are you running, anyway?" "Believe me, he's not my first choice for Arabella," Laura said through gritted teeth. "But my first choice, Mr. Reece, feels that if he were to marry my daughter, it would be a conflict of interest. Oh, Mother, doesn't the fact I don't love Mr. Reece count for anything?" Mr. Reece looked pained by Arabella's admission. "Oh, Mr. Reece, I'm so sorry. I mean, I love you, I just don't love you, you know? Not like that. While I'd love to catch up on your love life, Belle, I am more curious to see if anyone else has noticed that the dreaded water is up to our necks now," Jack said, interrupting. It was true. The crew had barely 6 inches of air to breathe between the surface of the water and the rocky ceiling of the cavern. One last time. "Help?" Jack asked the merfolk pathetically. Morverin dived with snooty grace under the water. Aquila and Aquila quickly followed. The crew's last hope was gone. Jack took a deep breath, as deep as he could, considering there was almost no air left in the chamber. And in the next moment, there was none at all. Seawater completely filled the cavern. He and his crew were trapped like figures in a snow globe, floating around, unable to get out. So now that the mermaids have left, Jack and the rest of the crew are losing hope. But then Jack has an idea. He realizes that the pool that was in the middle of the room was how the mermaids had appeared earlier. Earlier, of course, being at the end of the last book. And though he didn't see how they left, he assumes it must have been from that same pool. Of course, he doesn't know for sure if this will lead to someplace with air, but he is left with really no other options. So he leads everyone down to where the pool was in the middle of the cavern, and Jack goes down first. He then gets sucked into a whirlpool, like how he was pulled down in book 2 and 4 to see the mermaids, and he is eventually spit out into another area that thankfully has air. As soon as he stands up, Arabella and Billy come flying out, slamming into him, and then Laura and Mr. Reece come through, which knock Jack down again. And at this point, Jack knows what's coming, so he scrambles up and runs out of the way right before John and Tumen come flying through. But someone is missing, and John, of course, starts worrying because Constance is the one missing. But thankfully, she comes flying through the portal, but she smacks right into the cavern wall. She then falls to the ground and doesn't start moving. So John picks her up and starts fearing the worst. And Jack is ready to leave her there, but Arabella yells at him. And Jack rolls his eyes before he kneels down in front of Constance. So Jack is about to give Constance mouth to mouth, and he says, "Right, make no mistake about this," he said quietly through gritted teeth. "What is about to happen is not happening. You never saw this happen, and once it has happened, which it won't because it's not going to, it will never have happened. Savvy?" But anyway, Jack then starts giving Constance mouth to mouth, trying to get her to breathe, and it seems like it's not working at first, but then Constance throws up right into Jack's face. So Jack immediately walks over to John and wipes his face on John's shirt. But John, of course, doesn't care about that. He is just happy that Constance is alive. As they are all celebrating, Arabella tells them all to shush because she hears whispering nearby. So everyone tries to get closer to the source of the sound, and they come to a rocky precipice overlooking a huge chamber below them. And Jack recognizes this place as the lair of the merfolk he had been in under Isla Serena. But that time, there had been hundreds of mermaids in the chamber, and now there were only 3 mermaids occupying it. And that is none other than Morvarin, Aquila, and Aquala. So let's listen in on their conversation. So in the book it says, "Are you certain we should have left them there to perish, Morvarin? We could not risk bringing them here, Aquila. Could not risk them learning the truth." Their voices echoed eerily in musical whispers that were reminiscent of the hypnotic songs they sang. "But Jack Sparrow has been down here before," Aquala said, "and didn't discover the treasure trove." Morvarin shook her head. "We had control over our realm then. We could prevent him from discovering the treasure if we had to. We could have used force. Now we are alone. Revealing to Jack Sparrow and his crew that there was a passageway back here, back to Isla Serena, would have been too great a risk." "Riskier than leaving us 3 to face him who wields Poseidon's trident on our own?" Aquila demanded. "If that is our fate, so be it," Morvarin said mournfully. She was, Jack reflected, a bit of a drama queen. "Since the reemergence of the Purple Tails, our fate has been of utmost concern, has it not? Why complicate it with this added threat?" Aquila asked. "Purple Tails?" Arabella mouthed at Jack. "I've never seen one," he whispered back, shrugging. "There has never been a time, at least not within my memory, that any merfolk swam the seas freely. We have lived under a strict code from the time immemorial. Those of the Purple Tail seem to come and go as they please, requiring none of the protection of our society affords us. Somehow, they are barely affected by the power of the Trident. If the Trident cannot control them, then neither can we be expected to," Morvarin said. "What problem do they have with the hierarchy?" Aquala demanded. "It has always been this. Royal Blue Tails rule, Green Tails fight, and Red Tails serve. It has worked just fine for centuries, nay, for eons." "It's just that kind of attitude that made me a pirate," Captain Smith said disgustedly. "Kings and slaves, and all the classes and caste systems in between." "Aye," Mr. Reece agreed. "I thought you became a pirate because Dad was a drunk and you were sick of your life in Tortuga," Arabella said a little meanly. "That too, and don't question your mother," Captain Smith scolded. Jack shushed everyone this time. "Hello? Exposition going on here, mates. Enough of the family drama." The three bluetails below didn't seem to hear the crew's squabbling. While the mermaids' voices carried well from the open, echoey chamber below, Jack's crew's voices were muffled by the rocks they hid behind. "I've seen them," Morven continued. "Little groups of red tails gathered in the sewage chambers, green tails in the barracks, looking shifty, whispering, glancing over their shoulders." "Sewage chambers," Jack whispered with a shudder. "Yes, and sometimes even red and green together," Aquila piped up. "And the way they speak," Aquila said thoughtfully, "with all the whistles and strange clicks of their tongues, it's a code of some sort. It simply must be." "You must see my point, sisters. We need to nip this little revolution in the bud," Morven said forcefully. "Who knows what drastic steps they might try next? And what if the Greentails attempted a coup, attacked us outright?" Aquila and Aquila shuddered at the thought. "And there was the Nautilus we intercepted from the feeble-minded Redtail," Morven went on. "There can be no doubt that this resistance group was planning on storming Poseidon's peak and stealing the Trident for themselves." "Nautilus," Captain Smith whispered, confused. "Maybe it's like a missive or a letter," Arabella reasoned. "We had to act first, to prevent the disaster that would have been wrought on all of us." Morven said, slamming her fist into her other hand. "The Trident was the only possible way to maintain control over these incompetent masses." Wait, Jack whispered. "Let me get this straight. The Bluetails actually used the thrice-accursed Trident of power to control their own people? They told us they got it away from Poseidon so no one could control them anymore, so they could be free," Arabella said disgustedly. "Almost makes you feel bad for the merfolk, eh, Jack? I mean, the rest of them, not these blue ones," John said. "Almost," Jack said. But inside, he was seething. He hated seeing anyone wield such complete power over anyone else. No one should have had that right. Not over him, not over anyone else. "Was it such a good idea to give the Trident to Captain Torrents, though, I wonder?" Aquila said thoughtfully. "Oh no, they didn't," Jack said, stunned. "We had no choice," Morven hissed. "Only a human would be able to keep it out of the hands of the other merfolk. We had a deal. He would guard it and share sovereignty over the merfolk with us. The Trident stays out of the Resistance's hands, and we keep our status. The only thing we gave up was a little control, and since two-footers have such short lives, it wouldn't have lasted for long. Besides, all they are interested in is treasure. If we kept him buried in a stack of gold, he wouldn't have cared what went on. But like all humans, he was treacherous and lying," Aquila growled, splashing her blue tail in the water. "The moment he had the Trident, he took off with it, bent on controlling all the seven seas. He didn't even mind that he couldn't use the Trident on us, the Bluetails," Morven mused. "He now has an entire army, all the merfolk, under his control. He commanded them to leave their home here under Ila Serena and pillage and plunder the oceans of the world, giving him all the loot they found. And so, here we are, alone." Morven looked up at the roof of the chamber for dramatic effect. The crew shuffled back quickly from the edge of the precipice in order to avoid being seen. "We should just be grateful he doesn't know about our own trove. And above all, the gems," Aquila pointed out. "We are safe. For a time," Aquila added. Okay, so now we understand the motivations of the three blue-tailed mermaids. As we know, Morven, Aquila, and Aquila are the rulers of all the merfolk, but the reason they were in control was because of the power of Poseidon's Trident. And apparently, the green-tailed and red-tailed mermaids have been trying to start our revolution because of the reemergence of the purple-tailed mermaids, which we will learn about more later. So the Bluetails actually gave Torrents the Trident to help quell the revolution and to keep themselves in power. And we also found out they have gems. We will learn about these gems later too, but Jack has had enough and tells them they should leave. But everyone chimes in with their own ideas of what they should do. Billy feels empathetic towards the red-tailed mermaids, feeling sorry for them since they are constantly always being ordered around. So Jack gets frustrated and leans against a rock, but then the rock pushes some smaller ones off the cliff and into the chamber below, which of course alerts the Bluetails of their location. and they immediately begin to start singing, trying to hypnotize them. Last time, Jack wasn't affected by the song, since his greatest desire was freedom, but now his desire has changed to something else, so he feels himself slipping into a daze. And not too long after, everyone starts fighting each other, and someone pushes Constance into the water below. She starts to swim over to the blue tails, seeing their tails and how they reminded her of fish. So she gets hungry, thinking that the tails are indeed fish. So she bites down on Aquala's tail, which makes her stop singing for a moment, and everyone then is confused as to what they were doing. But Aquala begins to sing again with the others, and everyone goes back into their daze. But everyone then dives down into the chamber below where the mermaids are, and chaos just starts to break out everywhere. The siren song falters for a moment, and Jack realizes his greatest desire, which has shifted to escaping Isla Serena, has shifted again to defeating the Scaly Tails. So the crew pushes the Blue Tails back against one of the cavern walls, and Jack pops up from behind and orders them to stop singing. So they do as Jack says, and everyone wakes up from their daze. Morvrin tells them they admit defeat and will allow them to go through one of the portals, but Laura tells them to drop them off on the deck of the Flor de la Mort. So Morvrin agrees, and the crew goes through another portal, emerging on a deserted island. And Jack, of course, gets frustrated for being stuck on a deserted island again, as it has happened way too many times now. But while they're arguing, Jack and Billy point out something happening nearby. So back in the book, everyone looks to the shore and it says, all along the shore, the perfect aquamarine water was beginning to boil. Foaming and churning, the sea began to spit out things. Lots of things. Ugly, human-sized things. Squirming and writhing in a most unhuman way. Without a word, everyone drew his or her sword, tensing for battle. All around them, hundreds, no thousands of merfolk came crashing out of the waves, and these weren't the pretty flowing-haired mermaids of legend. They weren't even the tolerably cute, if annoying ones the crew had defeated just a few moments before. These were the merfolk out of a sailor's worst nightmare. Most had scaly fishtails, some had 2, some had 3 or more, that writhed and squirmed as if they had minds of their own, or they had slimy suckers along their lengths like an octopus. Some had normal legs, ending in webbed feet, or legs that started out normal then became fused at the feet, becoming one big, ugly flipper. Some of the merfolk had eels for hair. Some had, instead of normal mouths, open circles with rows and rows of pointed teeth spiraling back down into their gullets. Some had horns and fins growing out of their backs. Some had the soulless black eyes of sharks. And some even had wings, slimy ones like those belonging to flying fish. But instead of just allowing their owners to glide over the water, these allowed the dripping nightmares the crew was facing to fly. Those merfolk that could move on land crawled, slithered, or humped up the beach toward them, making wet, sucking noises as they went. That's a lot of cod to harvest, Jack said, trying to keep it light, but he was calculating the odds, and they weren't good. In fact, they were very, very bad. But we cannot attack them, Billy protested. Everyone turned to stare at him. Oh, Jack asked politely, because it's seriously looking like they don't have anything against attacking us. The wave of horrible mutant sea creatures was almost upon them now, roaring and whistling and screaming and bubbling. One lashed out at Jack with a whip-like tentacle. He parried, trying not to look directly at the disgusting mer creature it was a part of. They're only doing it under Torrents' power, Billy pointed out. It would be unjust and unfair to do them harm when they are not in control of their own actions. We should spare them their lives. It's true, Arabella agreed fervently. Captain Smith rolled her eyes. Oh, all right then, dear. I'll try my best not to hurt them. And with that, she reached up with her sword and swiped at a flying merman diving at her head. Her rapier cleanly sliced its left wing. The merman crashed to the ground, writhing in agony. Mother! Arabella shouted in horror. Billy put a hand on her shoulder to comfort her, then pulled her close. What? I tried, Captain Smith responded, shrugging. Jack tried not to smile. Sometimes he hated Captain Smith, and sometimes he absolutely loved her, though he'd never have let her know that, of course. Then Jack plunged into the battle. It could be truthfully said that no victorious battle had ever been fought like this one. The sheer magnitude and array of merfolk now present had never before been amassed on the surface. Creatures who hadn't felt the light of day on their faces in 100 years now bared their fangs under unfiltered sun. Jack fought as if he'd never had before. Squinting and frowning and occasionally grunting, he pulled every trick, every move he had ever learned or invented. He leaned sideways and kicked at something with the head of a shark while slicing at a merman with scaly white legs. He smashed two mermaids' heads together. They had been attacking from opposite sides. He ducked and rolled between the crab-like pincers of a third, while shoving his knife into its bony shell. Tumen's black obsidian knife sparkled in the sunlight as he spun and ducked and thrust. He murmured fervent prayers in Mayan. John had its friends back, but their usual jokes were absent. John's cheerful smile was gone, replaced by dead earnestness. He dispatched merfolk left and right, with barely a chance to breathe between one and the next. Captain Smith and Mr. Reece stood side by side, flanking Billy. While Mr. Reece skillfully wielded his cutlass, Laura showed her true pirate stripes. She had her sword in one hand and her knife in the other, and was doing equal damage with each. Billy really did try his best just to defend and not attack. He apologized and used the flat end of his cutlass to try to deliver blows to the creatures' heads. Arabella also tried this. But no matter what path the crew took, the creatures just kept coming. And while many of them couldn't actually come up onto land or into the sky, many could. There was no way Jack and his friends could win this battle. Escape was the only option. But how? It was a deserted island, and they had no boat. Jack thought quickly. Laura had demanded that the Bluetails set them on or near the Fleur de la Mort, and while the Scaly Tails were annoying and nasty, they usually kept their word. Jack fought with renewed vigor, working his way over to Captain Smith. During a break in the fighting when her back was turned, he very quickly picked something out of her pocket. Captain Smith whirled around, sword raised. "How dare you!" she roared, lunging at him. She was already in a berserk rage because of the battle and advanced on him with a fury he had never seen before. "What did you take? Give it back!" Jack held up what he had stolen from her, a compass, the one that showed her where the floor was when his sails were unfurled, making the ship invisible. "Hello?" Jack shook it. "I mean, you asked to go to your ship. Why didn't you think to actually look for it? As, I don't know, a lovely protected place to escape to?" She looked at him blankly for a moment. Then her eyes widened in realization. "I didn't," she faltered. "Some captain," Jack fired at her. "You're all my crew this and my crew that, and you can't even think of the obvious or go through all your available options. Strategy, we call it, mate. Strategy." "Well, I was too busy. I was going to look for the floor, but I got sidetracked," Captain Smith said lamely, making up excuses. "I was too busy saving your hide. If I hadn't had to do that, I would have found the floor already." Jack raised an eyebrow and otherwise ignored Captain Smith. She was obviously reaching for excuses. Jack concentrated on the compass. What he saw made his eyes bulge in amazement. "What?" Captain Smith demanded, frustrated and embarrassed. Jack showed her the compass. The sea was ahead of them, but according to the arrow, the Fleur de la Mort was right behind them. So we are now plunged into the middle of the biggest battle yet, and obviously now the reason the Fleur de la Mort wasn't nearby was that it actually was invisible due to its sails being unfurled. So Jack and Laura tell everyone to retreat to the dunes behind them where the floor has been beached. And as they make their way toward the supposed position of the ship, the tide starts to come in, and Jack slams into the side of the invisible Fleur de la Mort. The next challenge is to find a way on board, but before anyone can do that, thunder begins to rumble and the sky turns black. Lightning flashes across the sky, and rain begins to fall, and we obviously know who the cause of this is. But since they can't see Torrents, they assume he is on board the floor. Constance is able to find the ladder, and everyone runs over to where she is to get aboard the ship. So we're going to go back into the book and see what happens next. Alright, so it says, "The rain was pouring even harder, getting into the humans' eyes and making it harder for them to see. It posed no problem at all for the merfolk. All it did was drive the flying ones closer to the ground, and therefore closer to the people they were attacking. Tumen was the first one up the ladder, behind Constance, and Jack was a close second. He could use only one hand to climb, though. The other still held his sword. The angry, wet merfolk didn't quite understand what was going on, but they saw that their prey was trying to get away. Arabella and her mom followed, also fighting the harpy-like merfolk. Below them were Mr. Reece, Billy, and John bringing up the rear. Behind John was a mermaid with a squid for a body from the waist down. She used 4 of her tentacles to brace herself on the ground, and the other 4 to grip the bottom of the rope ladder and shake it mightily. She whacked it against the hull of the floor to the mort, trying to shake Jack and his friends loose like dirt from a rug. Jack stared down to her horrible gaping maw and sharp, painful-looking beak. Lightning struck. The ladder tensed, then violently jerked to the one side. Billy screamed as his arm was dragged along the barnacled hull of the ship. The ladder sagged and swung back and forth, the left side still taut, the right hanging limp. Jack looked up, protecting his eyes from the winged thing attacking him. There was smoke billowing from the top, where the left side had been attached to the ship. Apparently the lightning strike had severed it, and judging by the quantity of the smoke, it might not have been the only thing that had caught on fire. "Blasted pirate! You're setting my ship aflame!" Captain Smith yelled when she saw the damage to her beloved floor. She also said many more things in colorful words that made Billy Turner blush. Using all her strength, she clambered on up the ladder, ignoring the aerial attacks on her back and legs. She climbed over Jack, stepping on his head, and jumped aboard, immediately becoming invisible to him and anyone else who was not on the ship. But Jack knew that once he was on board, everything on deck, the entire ship, in fact, would be visible to him again. One by one, he and the rest of the crew managed to clamber up what was left of the rope ladder. Each one setting foot on deck seemed to disappear to anyone not on board. This completely confused the merfolk. The flying ones hovered and hissed, darting this way and that. The ones on the ground gibbered and screamed in frustration. Some tried to crawl or swim through the ship, which resulted in bumped heads, horns, and fins. "So what's the scene, mates?" Jack asked jauntily. He gave a friendly little wave to the merfolk who couldn't see him. Then he turned and faced the rest of his, or Captain Smith's, crew. It wasn't an entirely comforting scene. On one side of the ship, Torrents stood at the wheel. His eyes were mad, and almost green-gray that whirled and churned like the sea. A massive storm raged above him. Black clouds and lightning boiled out of the air above his head. He held the wheel with one hand and the trident in the other. He shook it and laughed, throwing his head back like a maniac. On the other side, toward the stern, stood Captain Smith, Arabella, Mr. Reece, Billy Turner, Tumen, John, and Constance. They looked nervous but ready, steel in their eyes, their hands on their weapons. They had been living with the specter of Torrents for the past year. This was it. This was the final showdown, and not everyone was going to make it out alive. Okay, it's the moment we've all been waiting for, the final battle with Torrents. So let's get right back into the book and see how this goes down. With a mighty cry worthy of the greatest captains in seafaring history, Captain Smith drew her sword and lunged at Torrents. Torrents let go of the wheel. He held his empty hand in the air, and a sword materialized in it, a shining, blindingly bright sword made out of pure lightning. It grew out of his fist and arced up until it grew into a claymore. Captain Smith brought her cutlass down in a beautiful swoop, aiming at Torrents' belly. He parried with the lightning sword. As the two swords clanged together, the electric current traveled up and down the claymore and ran through Laura's sword, and then through Laura. She spasmed in agony. A horrible cracking noise encompassed her body. A sickly burning smell of hair and skin enveloped the deck, and then she fell down, motionless. "That was quick," Jack said, but he couldn't mask the horror in his voice. "Mother!" Arabella cried. A true pirate, she didn't run over and embrace her mother's pale, unmoving form the way any other daughter might have. She drew her sword with her right hand and charged Captain Torrents with a bloody scream. "I'll kill you!" Billy followed closely, his own sword drawn. Arabella swiped at Torrents, ripping a patch of flesh under his arm. Torrents howled in pain and shot a series of short, deadly lightning bolts at her head. Arabella ducked, then ran forward, her sword ready, but she knew that any contact with the lightning sword was deadly and that she would have to avoid it. She and Billy double-teamed Torrents. Arabella feinted towards his right side while Billy jabbed at his right. Torrents twisted and brought his lightning sword around, making the pair jump. He blocked Arabella's next blow with the trident and scraped the lightning sword along the deck at Billy's feet. Turner jumped out of the way, and a black, scorched line was burned into the deck, demonstrating the fate he had barely avoided. But Torrents had other tricks up his sleeve. He closed his eyes and concentrated. A mighty wind was conjured forth, gusting toward the ship's boom. Arabella and Billy never saw it coming. John and Tumen cried out, but it was too late. With a sickening crunch, The boom cracked into the backs of their heads, toppling them to the deck. Jack winced. Torrents laughed wickedly. The rain was driving even harder now, no doubt influenced by Torrents' power over the elements. The deck was actually taking on rainwater. It was beginning to rise and slosh over the side. In fact, when he looked overboard, the land was disappearing too, Jack noticed. Patches of sand and seagrass were fading away as rain fell and the tide came in, flooding the desert island. The water made it possible for the merfolk to ring the ship on almost all sides now, hooting and screaming and hissing and clawing at it, as if hoping one of the crew would be tossed over the side and into their midst. Tumen, John, Constance, and Mr. Reece took the opportunity to attack Torrents all at once. They did better than Arabella and Billy and Captain Smith had. John darted in low, swiping at Torrents' feet with his cutlass, while Tumen moved in with his obsidian blade. Mr. Reece spun around and tried to attack him from the side. Constance yowled and threw herself at his boot, sinking her teeth into it. Torrents growled and parried all of the attacks, making sweeping moves with the lightning sword and the trident, and shaking Constance off his foot. The lightning sword arched brightly into Tumen, who brought his obsidian dagger up to deflect it, which it did. Jack noticed that the lightning didn't travel up the volcanic glass knife the way it had the metal swords. Before anyone could recover, Torrents slammed the trident into the deck. He summoned the power of the winds and caused the rainwater on deck to gather into a giant wave. Then he sent it crashing into the crew. The water broke over them and pulled them across the deck. Tumen, John, Mr. Reece, and Constance scrabbled to cling to anything that would keep them from being swept overboard and into the waiting maws of 1,000 angry merfolk. Between the wind and the rain, Jack couldn't see exactly what happened, but it didn't look as though any of them had made it out of the battle alive. All that was left on deck was Mr. Reece's shoulder belt and Tumen's obsidian blade. The blade was dug into the wood as though Tumen had struck it there to brace himself against Torrents' wave. Jack paused, thinking about his crew. Gone. All of them gone. Again. It was just Jack and Torrents now. The water around the floor had risen to such a high level that the ship was now bobbing lightly in the water. Merfolk swam around and around, waiting for whatever came next. Wind howled around the mad captain's head. "Give it up, Jack!" Torrents roared with a ghastly grin. "My curse grants me power over the elements, and the trident affords me power over the seas. It allows me to take out the tide and beach the floor. Do you really think you can defeat a man, a god, with such powers?" "I've done it before," Jack pointed out with a smirk. "Twice, in fact." Torrents roared and pointed the trident towards Jack. The deck rippled and quaked beneath their feet. It seemed as if it were ready to tear apart at the seams. "Oh, good move there, mate," Jack said, putting his hands out to steady himself. "Go ahead and destroy the only ship you have, and as far as I know, the only invisible ship on the seven seas." Torrents growled but stopped shaking the trident. "And just a warning," Jack said, drawing his sword and trying to distract Torrents from his real goal. "Real gods tend not to like it when you rank yourself among them. Just a warning. You are holding Poseidon's trident after all." Torrents howled and lunged at him with the lightning sword. Jack dropped his own sword and rolled. He grabbed Tumen's knife out of the hull and jumped back up, just in time to parry an attack from Torrents that otherwise would have taken off his head. The lightning sword crashed into Tumen's flashing black obsidian blade. Lightning scattered, temporarily blinding both of them. Torrents growled in frustration and waved his hand in the air, whipping up the air with his fiery sword. A giant gust of wind blew Jack all the way across the deck into the wooden rails. Torrents waved his hand again. Another powerful gust slammed Jack into the side of the cabin, dropping him to the floor like a broken rag doll. Before he could recover, Torrents wiggled his fingers. Horrible little arrows of wind lashed out at Jack, slicing his clothes and skin with razor-sharp debris picked up from the deck. He tried to get up, but Torrents slammed the trident into the deck again. The ship rolled, rocking from side to side. Jack was bleeding and bruised. Several ribs felt broken, and his left eye was starting to swell. Torrents approached Jack slowly, relishing his triumph. The cursed captain stood over him, his blazing sword in one hand and the trident in the other, and a dozen whirlwinds around his feet ready to kill at his command. "I'm going to enjoy this," he said with a sick smile. He spread his fingers, and little lightning bolts, not much more than sparks, began to fly at Jack. They scorched his ears, his chest, his knees, and wherever they struck, they burned. But they were only a hint of what was to come. Torrents spread his fingers wider. Jack summoned all of his strength and he brought Tumen's blade up, stabbing Torrents in the leg. It wasn't a fatal blow, but Torrents faltered, unprepared for the attack. He fell to one knee, blood gushing from the wound made by the black knife. The trident clattered to the deck. Jack grabbed it. Torrents lunged at Jack, trying to get it back. Jack just coolly pointed the trident at Torrents. The wood began to buckle and rock under the pirate captain. He stumbled and flailed, trying to get back up. He steadied himself, and Jack pointed the trident at him. Before Jack could even think about using the trident against Torrents, the staff filled up with the bizarre energy Jack hadn't felt since he'd last held the Sword of Cortez. The energy blast from the trident propelled Torrents right over the side of the floor. Jack glanced over the edge as Torrents plunged into the waiting arms, tentacles, and fins of 1,000 angry merfolk who were no longer under his control. There was a moment's stillness, with Torrents floundering in the waves, and then the merfolk spotted him. They began to swarm around him. Jack turned away. It was obvious what was going to happen next, and it wasn't going to be pretty. The merfolk were on Torrents like seagulls on a whale carcass, and that was something too terrible for even Jack Sparrow to witness. Almost immediately, the sky began to brighten. The clouds disappeared, and the rain stopped. The sun came out. The ocean calmed. Jack looked back out at the water. The merfolk were still there, but Torrents was nowhere to be seen. Jack shivered. He turned around. The deck of the floor made for a much happier picture. The crew had survived, though barely, and were slowly rising and regrouping on deck. John and Tumen were clambering back on board, having managed to hang onto the sides for dear life. Mr. Reece and Constance untangled themselves from the nets and barrels where they had been trapped. Arabella was tisk-tisking over the bump on the back of Billy Turner's head, and Captain Smith was groaning, rubbing her aching, burning back. "Good morning, mates," Jack said brightly. He walked jauntily over to the wheel of the ship and gave it a possessive pat. He grinned at Laura. "Look what I've found while you were catnapping." He lifted the trident. Captain Smith just groaned some more, collapsing glumly back onto the deck. "Blasted pirate code," she grumbled. "Yep, no pirate code applies to me. Not a pirate here," Jack said proudly. "No, you're not. Not yet, anyway," Laura said, grinning mysteriously. Alright, so Torrents is gone for good this time, and he met a pretty gnarly end there, but the entire crew managed to survive, thankfully. But there is still a little more left, as Jack walks over to the side of the ship, noticing how the merfolk were still waiting there in the water. Laura tells Mr. Reece to furl the sails so the floor becomes visible, and as soon as it does, Jack waves the trident in the air and the merfolk begin to cheer. So Jack begins to address the crowd. So we're going to go back into the book and see what happens here. "Alright then, my gibbering and loyal subjects. This here trident thing means I'm your king now, and my first royal proclamation is that you are all free to go. And by go, I mean really go. Somewhere very far from here. Far from this ship. Far from me in particular. Savvy?" He gave a friendly little royal wave, cupping his hand, and turned to go. "I'm afraid that is not possible, sire," a voice called out from the sea. Jack sighed, closing his eyes and dropping his shoulders. He should have guessed it wouldn't have been that easy. Although being called sire wasn't half bad. He didn't hate the sound of it at all. He stomped regally back over to the rail and leaned over. "Who said that?" he shouted, waving the trident for effect. A merman leapt out of the water to get its attention. "I did, sire." This member of the merfolk was much more traditional looking than the others. A handsome, human male upper body and a fish's lower body. Purple. In fact, he looked a lot like the Bluetails, except for the shade of his scales. "I am called Tonra, my lord." "Now he looks like I always imagined a merman to look," Captain Smith said thoughtfully, with a flirtatious smirk. "For once, you and I are in agreement, Mum," Arabella said, sighing dreamily. "Now what exactly do you mean, impossible?" Jack said, turning the conversation back to Tonra on the matter at hand. "I've got the trident here, mate. I talk, you walk, or swim, or leap, whatever it is you folks do. My lord, my people thank you for your kindness and generosity, but I beg your leave to show you why we are not free to go. Why we will never be free." Tonra motioned to the water beside him. "You want me to go down there?" Jack asked, incredulously sneering to the point of hilarity. There was no way he was diving down of his own free will into the crowd of monsters swirling below. "Oh, go on, your people want you," Captain Smith said with a snicker. And then she kicked Jack in his royal rear right off the deck. "Mother!" Arabella shouted. Falling to the air, Jack frowned, never loosening his grip on the trident. The merfolk quickly cleared a place for him to land. He hit the water with an amazing splat, in a belly flop that sent great sheets of water in all directions. Jack surfaced and growled up at the ship, seawater dripping into his eyes. Captain Smith gave him a friendly royal wave of her own. Jack had landed right next to Tanra, whose incredibly handsome, fresh face was grating on Jack's nerves. A whirlpool formed quietly next to them, disappearing into the sea below. "My lord, will you follow me?" Tanra entreated, as eager as a boy who wanted to play catch with an older brother. "I suppose I must," Jack said wearily. "The burdens of running a kingdom are almost too much for my royal self to bear." And then they dived down. Now long used to the portals of the mermaids, Jack crossed his ankles, relaxed, and enjoyed the ride. Tanra looked back at his guest anxiously, but Jack just yawned out a stream of air bubbles as if he did this every day, which recently seemed to be the case. The portal spat him out just a minute later. Prepared for it this time, Jack landed gracefully on his feet in a move that would have made any gymnast proud. They were back in the giant reception chamber, the one where they had fought the Bluetails just a few hours before. Aquila, Aquala, and Morvrin were still there. When they saw Tanra, they hissed and gibbered as disgustingly as any of the grosser, squiddy merfolk would have done. You dare to come back here?" Morvrin screeched. "Yes, I dare," Jack said, striding forward to the water. Then he realized they weren't talking to him. They were talking to the merman next to him. Us dare come back here. Yes. You all know each other?" "He is the leader of those who dare foment revolution," Aquila said, hissing with anger. "I'm liking you more and more, Tuna," Jack said cheerily to Tanra. The merman beamed back, "And it's not just your handsome mug." "Merfolk have lived happily for 1,000 years under the guiding hand of the Bluetails," Morvrin said, regaining control of her voice. "Why do you need to change that?" "Lived, perhaps," Tanra said with feeling, "but not happily. We have been serving and slaving for the privileged few for far too long, doing your dirty work while you do nothing at all. We rule. That is our lot," Aquala said snootily. "While you sit up here and comb your hair," Tanra sputtered with righteous indignation, "who tends to the kelp beds? Who harvests the sea slime? Who herds the algae?" "Does algae really need to be herded?" Jack asked, feeling slightly sick. "Everyone else, everyone but you," Tanra said, "and the red tails do all your dirty work and capture your prisoners and salvage your loot." "Loot?" Jack asked, eyes widening with interest. "It is a system that has worked well for 1,000 years, Morvrin said to Tanra. "Only because of the Trident and the harsh hands wielding it," Tanra shot back. "Yes, and thank you, Jack Sparrow, for returning to us what is rightfully ours," Morvrin said with an unctuous smile. She put her hand out. "Well, technically, it's rightfully mine, because I won it fair and square," Jack pointed out, "in a battle you lot thrust me into in the first place." Morvrin gave another hiss, and she and her fellow Bluetails swam forward, ready to attack. Up, 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 Jack said, shaking his finger at them with one hand and shaking the trident at them with the other. The earth began to quake under the water. Rocks fell from the ceiling above. Terrified, the Bluetails backed off, huddling against each other. "And try any of your siren song stuff and the whole ceiling comes down, savvy?" Jack said. Then he turned to Tanra and asked, "Was this what you needed to show me, Tuna?" "Tanra, my lord," the merman said shyly. "'Cause I've seen this lot before, and I agree with you completely. You had me at the words, 'Yes, I dare.'" "Thank you for that support, my lord," Tanra said. "But this is not all I wanted to show you. There is further evidence of their tyranny." The merman swam around the three mermaids, shooting them a nasty look. Jack followed as best as he could, hip deep in water. "You will pay," Morvrin promised, acid in her voice. "Traitor! No two-footer has ever treaded into such sacred territory as the Trove. You will pay." At the back of the chamber was a locked door set in a small alcove. Tanra gestured politely to Jack. "No problem, mate," Jack said cheerfully. He gently tapped the trident on the door, and the lock shattered easily and silently. "Handy thing, this," he mused, opening the door and following the merman in. What he saw inside made his jaw drop. The walls and ceiling were lined with hundreds of little recesses, like those carved into walls for candles. But instead of candles, there were gems, huge, glowing and twinkling gems in all colors of the rainbow. Red, green, yellow, orange, chartreuse, aquamarine, teal, brown, black, tan. They flickered and cast multicolored shadows on the wall. "It's making me a little sick, actually," Jack admitted. "Each of these stones is one of the different types of merfolk. One was created for each kind of mer. The trident affects these gems, thus indirectly controlling the merfolk. Poseidon himself had them created by the clever god Hephaestus, and gathered them here deep within Elis Arena. Look, he pointed to a locked metal cabinet hanging on the wall. A faint blue light shone through an intricate, rusted keyhole. Over 1,000 years ago, Morvran's ancestors had the Blue Stone, the one which controls the Blue Tails, locked in a separate chamber designed by another deity, the goddess Calypso. The chamber is shielded from the Trident, and thus the Trident has no power over them. The Blue Tails have used that to their advantage. They kept control of the Trident and therefore the rest of us, and we have been enslaved to them ever since. When your foe, Torrents, usurped the Trident, he had control over all us merfolk, every breed and variety, as you saw. Every one of our kind except those of the Blue Tail. Tanra then turned and pointed to a dimly flickering purple stone. It had a jagged gash through it, as if it had been formed improperly. Cut, clarity, karat, and color, my friend. That is not a valuable diamond, Jack observed. That is the stone of my people, the Purple Tails, Tanra said. It is flawed, as you see, and therefore it does not hold absolute power over us, only influence. He sighed deeply, gesturing sadly at the stones. So as I said, sire, we will never truly be free, not as long as these stones exist. Not as long as the Trident has any power over us. The word free reverberated in Jack's soul. Freedom was what he himself had been searching for over the last year. Freedom over his fate, over his future, over his destiny. All he wanted was to sail the seas freely, going where he wanted, when he wanted, with whomever he wanted, to be free from imperious parents and ancient curses and anyone else trying to tell him what to do. How could he truly be free with the weight of an entire race of beings on his back? It wasn't just that this power, this responsibility, was far too great for Jack Sparrow. He just really didn't care enough about managing other people's lives. He had enough trouble managing his own. Well, Tuna, Jack said slowly and seriously, looking at all the pretty glittering gems. This may not make any sense to you. I'm not sure it makes any sense to me. But the only way for me to be free is for you to be free. So my first official act as ruler of the merfolk, I'd like to ask you to step outside for a moment. Tanra looked confused but hopeful. As you wish, sire, he said, gracefully gliding out under the water and closing the door behind him. A great rumbling came from the room. Tanra and the Blue Tails looked at one another nervously. Around the edges of the door, light flashed in 1,000 different colors. There was a huge explosion, and rumbles and crashes like 1,000 panes of glass breaking. Then there was silence. The door opened, and Jack came out, multicolored smoke rising around him. Behind him, every crystal in the room had been destroyed. A rainbow of fine, sparkling dust floated up into the room. The metal chamber that Calypso had created for the Blue Tails was torn off the wall and lay on the floor. Fool! You have no idea what you have done, or the destruction you have wrought, Morvran cried. Jack waved his hand at her dismissively, then laid it on Tanra's shoulder. You're all free now, Jack said. Sire, if you don't mind my interference, I believe we will need a steady hand to guide us. We have been captive for so long, we could fall into ruin gaining our freedom so quickly. Will you be that guiding force? Jack wrinkled his nose and sneered. He had never thought of himself as a steady hand, or a proper guide, really. Sure, yes, of course, Jack said flippantly. But I can't be down here overseeing things all the time. I'm going to need a first mate down here, Jack winked at Tanra. Tanra glowed with pride. The Blue Tails grew livid. You listen to him now, savvy, Jack said, shaking his finger at the 3 Blue Tails, as if they were young sisters who needed to mind. Now, how in Hades do I get out of here? I can't take the smell anymore. Ever again, really. My lord. Jack, Jack said, correcting him with a gentle smile. Captain Jack Sparrow. Captain, Tanra said with a grin. I bid you goodbye with the heartiest thanks of the merfolk. Tanra lifted his hands. A watery portal opened in the waves, and Jack jumped through, catching a glimpse of the 3 Blue Tails as he shot from the room. He couldn't be sure, but he could have sworn that Morvran had collapsed on the chamber floor. So Jack has now made his biggest choice yet, and that was freeing the entirety of the merfolk from the control of the Blue Tails. Obviously, we know Jack values freedom above all else, and that goes for others too. We will also see this trait on display in The Price of Freedom when we cover that soon. So, to free the merfolk, Jack destroys all of the gems in the trove, freeing each race of merfolk from the control of the Trident. And technically, though Jack leaves Tanra in command, Jack is still technically the ruler of all the merfolk. But anyway, Jack is sent back out of the chamber and up onto the surface, and he makes his way over to the Fleur de la Mort. He climbs up on board, and the whole crew greets him. So let's go see how the book ends. The entire crew greeted him, and Arabella nudged her mother impatiently. "Do you not have something to say, Mum?" she pouted. Captain Smith sighed. Then she cleared her throat and strode forward, approaching Jack. He leaned back on his heels and waited with amusement. "Thank you, for saving my life," Captain Smith said, very reluctantly. "Why, it was no problem at all, Laura," Jack began. "But don't ever expect me to repay the favor," she finished, glaring at him. Then she turned to her daughter. "How was that, dear?" Arabella shrugged, sighing. It was obviously the best her mother could manage. "And to show her thanks," Arabella said, "Mum has asked that you join us aboard the Floor." Captain Smith looked so pained, so tight-jawed, that Jack was pretty sure she was going to throw up right then and there. He smirked. She wanted him aboard her ship about as much as she wanted a boil on the tip of her nose. In short, Jack saw that he could have a lot of fun on the captain's ship. "Of course, by the code, Captain, the Floor is rightfully mine anyway," he said nonchalantly. He put his hands behind his back and strolled down the deck. "I did save her, after all," he mumbled as he walked away. Laura almost exploded in rage. Then she took a deep breath and began doing captain-y things, ordering people and strutting about. That always made her feel better. "Billy, batten down those barrels over there. John and Arabella, unfurl the sails. Make us invisible. I want us out of here, away from here, as quickly as possible. Mr. Reece, to me. Tumen, plot us a course for someplace interesting." Jack stood out over the bow, tuning out the commotion behind him. Above, a large, warm orange sun sank down slowly into the Caribbean dusk. Below, the azure seas of the Caribbean lay placidly in every direction, sparkling where a small wave broke or a fish jumped out of the water. Ahead, the water stretched all the way to the horizon, all the way to forever. Jack had done many exciting things in the course of his adventures thus far, but nothing as big, nothing as important, as freeing an entire race of beings. The merfolk were free now, and they would soon be building a better life for themselves, all because of him. Of course, he had also just become their ruler, but really, was that such a bad thing? King of the merfolk, he mused to himself. He wondered if life would always be this good. Constance, for once dry and fluffy, though still kind of gross and mangy, gave a little meow and rubbed against Jack's leg. Jack picked her up and gave her chin a scratch, then rubbed her head. She purred and pushed further into his arms. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gem, a glittering stone that glowed blue in the sunlight, the same color blue as Morvern's tail. Who knew when it would come in handy? The quest for freedom was often fraught with peril and danger, battle and trickery. He put the stone back into his pocket and patted it lightly. Then he smiled and he looked out on a glorious sunset and a future full of possibility. It was the boldest horizon he had ever seen. And that is the end of Bold New Horizons and the end of the Young Jack Sparrow series. Of course, we're not technically done yet since we still have the tale of Billy Turner to cover next. But after that, we will be fully finished with this entire series. Thank you to everyone who has been following along with the series. It's been quite the adventure. It's essentially been almost half of a year that I've been submerged in this series, as we started covering it on the podcast in July, and now it's almost the end of December. So it will be very strange to be no longer in this world of Young Jack Sparrow. But of course, the Pirates of the Caribbean action will continue, no doubt about that. Thank you for everyone who has sent me messages or emails about how much they are enjoying the podcast. Thanks to everyone who has rated or reviewed the podcast wherever you prefer to listen to it. And thanks to everyone who has purchased merch on TeePublic. I know I say this a lot, but it really, really means a lot that you are also invested in Pirates of the Caribbean as much as I am. And I am forever grateful to every single person who has listened to this podcast. I will see you all next time for the tale of Billy Turner, as well as an interesting deep dive on a specific theory surrounding Will Turner's mother. Have a great holiday, and I will see you next time. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads @Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X @PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on TeePublic. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.